When our parents left me and my little brother home alone, I offered him something he couldn't resist. Something that would turn into the most unforgettable days of our lives. My name's Aaron, and I never imagined I'd find myself in a situation like this. Growing up, my younger brother James and I shared a bond that felt unbreakable. He was 5 years younger than me, always the kid I looked out for. I was the one who stood up to bullies for him, helped him with homework, made sure he felt safe. But as time passed, life slowly pulled us in different directions. I went off to college and started working full-time. Meanwhile, James was still trying to figure out high school and himself. Our parents were constantly busy. Not neglectful, just never around much. Their demanding schedules left little room for family time. So the responsibility of looking after James often fell to me, especially once I was old enough to drive and take care of things at home. But I didn't mind. James was easy to be around, always cheerful, always trying to make people laugh. Being with him never felt like a chore. Still, everything changed after I moved out. I was 24 now, living in a small apartment across town. I didn't visit home as much as I should have, and guilt would creep in every time I realized how much I was missing. The carefree little brother I remembered was growing into someone I barely recognized, and that truth hit harder than I wanted to admit. Then one weekend, our parents announced they were heading out of town for a business retreat, 3 days away. James would be home alone. My mom called me, her voice tight with worry. "He's old enough to take care of himself," she said. "But it would give me peace of mind if you stayed with him." I agreed, mostly out of guilt. I didn't have anything else planned, and maybe this would be a chance to reconnect. When I showed up at the house, James opened the door with his usual crooked grin. "Long time no see. Stranger," he teased, pulling me into a quick hug. Yeah, I said, rolling my eyes but smiling. "You missed me," he laughed, stepping back to let me in. The house looked exactly the same, tidy but lived in, with the faint scent of lemon cleaner still hanging in the air. It felt strange being back, like stepping into a time capsule from my teenage years. We spent that first evening catching up. James told me about school, his friends, and his plans for college. I shared bits of my life too, just enough to keep the conversation easy. Felt good, like we were slowly rebuilding the bridge time had worn down between us. For a while, it felt like nothing had changed. But as the hours passed, I started noticing things about James that hadn't been there before. He wasn't a kid anymore. He was taller now, his shoulders broader, his voice deeper. There was a quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. Something new, something mature, caught me off guard. I found myself struggling to match this young man sitting across from me with the little brother I'd always pictured in my mind. That night, after we finished dinner and cleaned up the kitchen, James suggested we watch a movie. "Something good," he said, flipping through options on the TV. "Not one of those boring ones you like." "Excuse me," I said, feigning offense. "My taste in movies is impeccable." He smirked and finally landed on a comedy we'd both watched a dozen times. As the opening credits rolled, he flopped down beside me on the couch, legs stretched out, totally at ease. For a while, everything else faded. We just sat there, laughing at the same old jokes, quoting lines we knew by heart, slipping into a rhythm that felt familiar and easy. Safe, but every now and then I'd catch James looking at me, not in a way that was strange or unsettling, but with an intensity that made my stomach flutter. I told myself I was imagining it. He was my brother after all. There was nothing unusual about the way he looked at me. Was there when the movie ended. James stretched and let out a yawn. "I'm gonna grab a drink," he said, standing up and heading to the kitchen. I stayed on the couch, scrolling through my phone as I waited for him to come back, but a few minutes later I heard his voice from the kitchen. "Hey Aaron, you want something?" "Sure," I called back. Surprised me when he returned. He was carrying 2 glasses of soda. He handed one to me before sitting back down closer this time. His knee brushed against mine and I felt a jolt of something I couldn't quite explain. "Thanks," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged, taking a sip of his drink. "No problem." We sat in silence for a while, the faint hum of the TV filling the room. I tried to focus on my phone, but I could feel his presence beside me, the warmth of him so close it was distracting in a way. I wasn't prepared for, and I found myself shifting uncomfortably, unsure of what to do with the strange energy in the room. The silence stretched as we sat there on the couch, the faint glow of the television casting shadows across the room. I scrolled through my phone, pretending to focus on something, anything other than the strange energy. I couldn't ignore. James was close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him, his knee brushing against mine every so often when he shifted. It was nothing, I told myself, just proximity, but the part of me that couldn't quite relax thought otherwise. So James said, suddenly breaking the quiet, "What's life like in the big city? Do you miss it here at all?" His question was casual enough, but the way his eyes fixed on mine made me hesitate. "I mean, yeah, sometimes," I replied, setting my phone down, "but it's different now. I like having my own space, you know." He shrugged again, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "It's not your fault. You had your own stuff going on. But I'm glad you're here now." "Me too," I said, reaching out and giving his shoulder a gentle squeeze. "And hey, I'm always here if you need me. You know that, right?" "Yeah," he said, his smile growing a little. "I know." For a moment it felt normal again, comfortable, easy. But as my hand lingered on his shoulder, I became suddenly aware of the quiet in the room, and the way his eyes softened as they met mine. I pulled my hand back quickly, my cheeks warming as I turned away. "Anyway," I said, clearing my throat, "we should probably get some sleep. It's getting late." "Yeah," he agreed, standing up and stretching. "Good idea." He started toward the stairs, then paused at the bottom and glanced back at me. "Good night, Aaron." "Good night." "Night," I replied, forcing a smile as he disappeared upstairs. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My thoughts were a tangled mess, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what. I turned off the TV and headed into the kitchen to rinse out my glass. The house was quiet now, just the low hum of the refrigerator breaking the stillness. I stood by the window for a while, watching the shadows of trees sway gently in the moonlight, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't untangle. Something about the night felt different, close, complicated. When I finally went to bed, sleep didn't come easy. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the tension hanging in the air. James's words, his expressions, the tone in his voice. It all felt significant somehow, but I couldn't explain why. Still, something told me change was coming. And later I'd realize I was right. The next morning, I woke to the sound of faint music drifting in from downstairs. Groggy and disoriented, I checked the time. It was later than I'd thought, the sun already high in the sky. I got dressed quickly and followed the music down to the kitchen. James was there, humming along to a song on the radio while making breakfast. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair slightly tousled from sleep. For a moment, he looked just like the kid I used to tease and protect. But he wasn't a kid anymore. There was something more confident about him now, something more self-assured. And it caught me off guard. "Morning," he said, glancing up as I walked in. "I made eggs. Want some?" "Sure," I said, taking a seat at the table. "Thanks." He placed a plate in front of me, then sat across from me with that same easy smile, the one that somehow made it hard to stay in my own head. We ate in comfortable silence, the warmth of the morning sun streaming through the windows, casting a soft golden light across the room. "This is nice," James said, suddenly breaking the quiet. "Having you here feels like old times." "Yeah," I said with a smile. "It does." But even as I said it, I knew things weren't the same. The familiar comfort of our relationship had shifted into something else, something I couldn't quite name. It sat heavy in my chest, made my thoughts race, and no matter how I tried to ignore it, it wasn't going away. The morning drifted by in a haze of routine, but the unspoken tension between James and me lingered, quiet but undeniable. He seemed to feel it too. James seemed more relaxed than I was, humming along to the radio as he cleaned up the kitchen. I busied myself with small tasks, anything to keep from thinking too much. It felt like every glance, every word, carried a weight I couldn't ignore. By the time lunch rolled around, I was restless. James suggested watching another movie, but I couldn't sit still. "Why don't we go for a walk?" I said, hoping the fresh air might clear my head. James grinned. "Sounds good. Let me grab my shoes." We stepped out into the neighborhood, where quiet streets were lined with tall trees and perfectly trimmed lawns. It was the kind of place that never really changed, no matter how much time passed. We walked side by side, talking about nothing in particular. His classes, my job, the neighbor's dog that barked at everything. Felt easy again, like slipping back into a rhythm we hadn't shared in years. But even as we laughed and traded stories, I couldn't ignore the occasional brush of his shoulder against mine, or the way his gaze lingered when he thought I wasn't looking. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. At the end of the street, we reached the park, a familiar stretch of grass and pavement dotted with memories. The old swings creaked softly in the breeze, and the faded lines of the basketball court were still barely visible beneath the dust. James dropped onto one of the swings, his long legs nearly reaching the ground, and nodded for me to join him. I hesitated, then sat beside him, the chains groaning faintly under my weight. "This place hasn't changed a bit," he said, his voice laced with nostalgia. "Yeah," I murmured, smiling faintly. "Feels like we spent half our childhood here." "Probably because we did," he said, laughing. "You always insisted on pushing me on the swings, even when I told you I could do it myself. That's because you always jumped off midair and landed in the mud." I shot back with a grin. "Mom made me promise to keep you out of trouble." He chuckled, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "You were always looking out for me." "Of course," I said softly. "You're my little brother." He didn't respond right away. His expression turned thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how different things would have been if Dad had been around more?" His question caught me off guard. I glanced at him, unsure how to answer. "I guess," I said finally. "But you turned out pretty great, you know? You don't need him to be proud of you." He looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment there was a vulnerability in his gaze that made my chest ache. "Thanks," he said quietly. "That means a lot." We sat there in silence for a while, the soft sounds of the park, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze, filling the space between us. It was peaceful, but the tension from earlier still lingered beneath the surface, quiet but present. Eventually, James stood, brushing his hands against his jeans. "We should head back," he said. "It's starting to get chilly." "Yeah," I replied, rising to my feet. The walk home felt longer than before. The silence between us was heavier now, like we were circling something we didn't know how to name, something neither of us was quite ready to face. By the time we got back to the house, I was more than ready to retreat to the guest room, just to get some space and clear my head. But James had other plans. "Let's play a game," he said with a grin, grabbing a controller from the console. "Loser does the dishes tonight." "You're on," I said, grateful for the distraction. For the next hour, we slipped back into a familiar rhythm. Competitive banter and laughter filled the room, loosening the tension that had been hanging over us all day. James, of course, won most of the rounds, as he always did, but I managed to steal a win or two, much to his fake outrage. By the time we finished, the strange energy from earlier felt like it had lifted, at least for the moment. "I'm still not doing the dishes," I said, turning off the console and crossing my arms in mock defiance. "Fair enough," he laughed. "I'll let you off the hook this time." The rest of the evening passed quietly. We ate dinner, talked a bit about plans for the next day, and eventually settled into our routines. But as the house grew quieter and the night deepened, that subtle tension started creeping back in. It felt like something was building, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my thoughts restless. That's when I heard it, the soft creak of the floorboards just outside my room. My heart jumped. I froze, listening. The footsteps were light but deliberate, drawing closer. Then, a knock. "Aaron?" It was James's voice, soft, hesitant. I sat up, my pulse quickening. "Yeah. Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, glancing at the clock. It was late. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the fridge downstairs. "What's wrong?" I asked. I need to talk to you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I let out a quiet sigh, swung my legs over the side of the bed, and stood. "Okay," I said. "Come in." The door creaked open and James stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He closed it softly behind him, then leaned against it for a moment like he was gathering courage. Finally, he crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to look at me right away. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. There was a tightness in my chest I couldn't ignore. He was quiet for a beat, staring at the floor like the words were buried there. "I've just been thinking a lot lately," he said finally. "About us. About how much you mean to me." My heart thudded painfully, and I tried to keep my expression neutral. "James, you're my brother," I said gently. "Of course we mean a lot to each other. That's how family works." "It's not just that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper now. "You've always been there for me in a way no one else has. You've always understood me." "James," I started, but he cut me off. "I don't want to mess anything up," he said quickly, like he'd been rehearsing this in his head. "But I need you to know, you matter to me, more than anyone. I don't know what I'd do without you." His words hung in the air, thick with emotion I couldn't quite name. The silence stretched between us, too long, too charged. I could feel something in the room shift, like all the things we'd left unsaid were finally catching up to us. I stared at him, my thoughts racing, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. He looked at me then, really looked, eyes wide and searching, like he was hoping I'd say something that would make it all make sense. The walls I'd built so carefully over the years felt like they were starting to crack. "James," I said finally, my voice low but steady. "I don't think you understand how hard this is for me to hear." I said firmer now. "But we need boundaries, James. This isn't something we can let linger." He stood after a long pause, his movements deliberate. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "I know," I said gently. "I'm not angry with you, but we need to be careful. For both our sakes." He lingered at the door a moment longer before stepping out. When the door clicked shut behind him, it felt like the air finally released, but the tension in my chest didn't. I stayed sitting there for a long time, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of everything that had just unfolded. And somehow, deep in my gut, I knew something had shifted. Something was coming. I could feel it. "You holding up?" I asked. He shrugged, eyes dropping to the floor. "I'm fine." I sat down beside him, leaving just enough space so it didn't feel too close. "I know things feel weird right now," I said gently, "but I want to work through it. I don't want this tension between us." "I don't either," he said quietly. "I just don't know how to fix it." "We'll figure it out," I told him, offering a small smile. "It'll take time, but we'll get there." He glanced over at me, something in his face softening. "Thanks," he said, "for not freaking out." "I'm your brother," I replied simply. "I'll always have your back." Some of the tension between us eased, and for the first time in days, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. We kept talking, drifting into lighter subjects, school, friends, plans for the weekend. By the time I left his room, the pressure in my chest had lessened, if only slightly. But that night, the quiet in the house felt heavy again. James's words, his emotions, everything we hadn't said, it still clung to me. I tried to convince myself we'd made progress, that things would settle, but deep down I wasn't so sure. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thoughts spinning. His voice, his expression from earlier, it all looped in my mind. I told myself this was just a phase, that we'd find our way back to normal. But a part of me knew this wasn't over. And then, just after midnight, I heard it. Soft footsteps in the hallway. My chest tightened as they stopped just outside my door. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. Then came the knock, quiet, hesitant. Aaron? James's voice was barely above a whisper. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. Yeah. Can I come in? I glanced at the clock. It was late. The house was still. But I couldn't bring myself to say no. What's going on? I asked. Silence. Then, I need to talk. I hesitated. Okay, I said softly. Come in. The door creaked open and James stepped inside. He looked nervous. Hands shoved in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. He shut the door behind him, leaning against it for a beat before making his way over and sitting at the edge of the bed. I'm sorry, he said, voice barely audible. I know I shouldn't be here. It's okay, I said, even though my pulse was racing. What's on your mind? He paused, eyes fixed on the floor. I've just been thinking a lot about everything. I said it earlier, and I'm scared I messed everything up. You didn't, I said firmly, leaning forward. James, I told you we'll figure this out, but it's going to take time. I know, he said, his voice trembling, but it's hard. I feel like I'm stuck in my own head, and I don't know how to get out. I placed a hand on his shoulder, gently squeezing. You're not alone, I said. We'll get through this together. He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine. The intensity in his gaze made my chest tighten. You've always been there for me, he said softly, even when no one else was. I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't have to think about that, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was heavy, thick with emotion I didn't know how to put into words. James's expression was raw, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen, and it left me speechless. I just want things to be okay again, he said at last, his voice breaking. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I said, though my voice was trembling now. But we need to set some boundaries, James. This can't take over everything. He nodded slowly, though his face still looked conflicted. I know, he said. I'm trying. I know you are, I replied, my voice softer now. And that's what matters. The tension in the room shifted. Not gone, but settling into something less suffocating. James didn't move to leave like I thought he might. Instead, he stayed there, eyes locked on mine, as if searching for something he couldn't quite name. The air between us felt charged. Every breath, every heartbeat, louder somehow. I said it earlier, and I'm scared I messed everything up. You didn't, I said firmly, leaning forward. James, I told you we'll figure this out, but it's going to take time. I know, he whispered, his voice trembling, but it's hard. I feel like I'm stuck in my own head, and I don't know how to get out. I placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. You're not alone, I said. We'll get through this. Together. He looked up then, his eyes locking onto mine. There was something in his gaze, raw and intense, that made my chest tighten. You've always been there for me, he said softly, even when no one else was. I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't have to think about that, I said, my voice steady. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, thick with unspoken emotion I didn't know how to name. James's expression was unguarded, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it, and I didn't know how to respond. I just want things to be okay again, he said at last, voice cracking. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I said, though my voice was trembling now. But we need to set some boundaries, James. This can't take over everything. He nodded slowly, though his face still looked conflicted. I know, he said. I'm trying. I know you are, I replied, my voice softer now. And that's what matters. The tension in the room shifted. Not gone, but settling into something less suffocating. James didn't move to leave like I thought he might. Instead, he stayed there, eyes locked on mine, as if searching for something he couldn't quite name. The air between us felt charged. Every breath, every heartbeat, louder somehow. I said it earlier, and I'm scared I messed everything up. You didn't, I said firmly, leaning forward. James, I told you we'll figure this out, but it's going to take time. I know, he whispered, his voice trembling, but it's hard. I feel like I'm stuck in my own head, and I don't know how to get out. I placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. You're not alone, I said. We'll get through this. Together. He looked up then, his eyes locking onto mine. There was something in his gaze, raw and intense, that made my chest tighten. You've always been there for me, he said softly, even when no one else was. I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't have to think about that, I said, my voice steady. I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, thick with unspoken emotion I didn't know how to name. James's expression was unguarded, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen it, and I didn't know how to respond. I just want things to be okay again, he said at last, voice cracking. I don't want to lose you. You won't, I said, though my own voice shook now. But we need to set boundaries, James. This can't take over everything. He nodded slowly, though his face remained conflicted. I know, he said. I'm trying. I know you are, I said, softer now. We move forward now. He looked at me, his eyes searching, full of questions he didn't dare ask. Then slowly, carefully, like he didn't want to disturb the moment, he stood. Good night, Aaron, he said quietly. Good night, I replied, watching him as he stepped out. The door clicked shut behind him, and I finally exhaled, a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My thoughts were all over the place. The moment was fleeting, yes, but it mattered. We'd crossed a line, but maybe that line was what we needed. A shift, a chance for clarity. I didn't know what came next, but for the first time in days I felt hopeful. Hopeful that maybe we could figure it out. Together. The next morning, the house felt lighter somehow. James joined me for breakfast, and for once he seemed at ease. We talked about the day ahead. It was small talk, but it flowed easily, naturally. Felt like progress. And I held onto that feeling like a lifeline. When it was time to go, James walked me to the door. Josh wasn't back yet, which honestly felt like a blessing. This was something I had to face alone. Thanks for staying, James said, his smile soft but sincere. It meant a lot. I'm glad I did, I told him. I'll be back soon. Okay? We'll keep talking. We'll figure this out. He nodded, his expression hopeful. Yeah, we will. As I drove away, the house faded in the rearview mirror. But the weight of everything that happened still lingered. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, I knew that. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like we were moving in the right direction. And somehow that was enough. Back at my apartment, life returned to its usual rhythm. But I couldn't shake that night from my mind. I thought about James more than I wanted to admit. Wondered how he was doing, if he'd found the answers he was searching for. And then, a few weeks later, he texted me. Hey, just wanted to say thanks again, things feel clearer now, I'm doing okay. I stared at the message for a long time before replying, I'm glad, take it one step at a time, okay, I'm always here if you need me. His response was simple, no, I'll be fine. It wasn't closure, not exactly, but it was a step forward, and for now that was enough. Still till this day, I am not so sure what to think of it. I'm curious what other people think of it. Is it okay what I have done, what we have done? Should I feel guilty? Please let me know in the comments, it would help me a lot. Thank you.